Now, on this channel, I always introduce myself as a landscape photographer, but one big reality is that maybe 80% of the professional work that I do is for architecture and interiors, specifically commercial interiors. And every so often, I want to do some content about just the process of shooting and give some tips about that. So in this video, let me give you 5 non-technical tips on how you can improve your workflow when shooting interiors. Now, photographing interiors will always have a huge chunk of unpredictable factors for the photographer. And these factors can only be managed properly if you actually plan out your shoot very well. And of course, if you actually get to know the space that you are shooting. The challenges that you will encounter will be related to the size of the place that can be either too big or too small. Also, one of the biggest things that you should always consider and you should always anticipate will be the lighting. Because especially if what you're shooting has a lot of available ambient light, natural light coming in, just like what I have right now, you should be able to consider all of those in number one, planning when you are going to shoot, when meaning the exact day and also the time of day, because you want to be able to foresee where the sunlight will be coming from and use it to your advantage. And at the same time, this will also help you anticipate and manage or even manipulate the available artificial light that you have in the scene. A space tends to be tricky to shoot when there is a lot of available artificial light that you cannot control or you cannot just simply adjust or switch off. So all of these things you really have to consider. So here are 5 tips that will help you plan and execute your shoot better so that you can focus on the creative side of course, photographing that space. Now, the first one is what I call the day zero principle or whatever. I'm just trying to make it sound fancy. But the point is try to shoot the space as close as possible to day zero. Now, what is day zero? Day zero should be the day of or the day prior to the turnover of whoever built the space and whoever did the final touches, whoever had the last touch. May this be an interior designer, contractor, or maybe someone who did final cleaning, whoever did the last touch. You want to come in right before they turn it over to whoever is going to use the space. Obviously, this is because you want to be able to photograph the space in mint condition. You want to be able to photograph the space in its pristine condition, exactly how it was made and designed. The more the space is used before you actually get to shoot it, the more you will have to deal with unwanted clutter, the more you will have to deal with things that you might need to retouch. And ultimately, if it's already in operation and there's a lot of foot traffic, you might not have the luxury of being able to control that, and that will ultimately cause delays or even hindrances. Now, over the past week, I did a shoot for a new location of a small steakhouse here in just actually right across the studio. And it's owned by a good friend. So, one of the things that we pushed for is that I shot it on a holiday simply because it was day one of operations. It was soft opening, so not a lot of people knew that they were already open. And this was as close as I could get because I had a commitment the day prior, which would have been day zero. And while there were still challenges that stemmed from some people dining in, it wasn't really a problem because it also gave me some time to talk to the owner. And so day zero will not always be a perfect hit, but try to shoot as close as you can to it. I shot on a holiday. Everyone should have been resting, basically. I should have been resting because I wasn't feeling well either. But I pushed to do that shoot because if I were to delay it even further, I knew I would have to deal with more people in the place and at the same time, just more clutter that would build on and basically the wear and tear of the details in the space. And ultimately, it's going to be harder, so I just had to push through with it. Now, I mentioned that it was good that I had to wait a bit because I wanted to talk to the owner. Again, the owner is a good friend. We talk a lot, but I used this time to talk to her because I wanted to communicate properly about some things about the space. Of course, I'm already familiar with her business. I'm already familiar with their steakhouse. It's called Steak to One. And I know the menu. We eat there a lot. We order food there a lot. But I wanted to know more about this particular brand. I wanted to know specifically how she feels about it, what triggered for this new location, what's the story behind basically putting it up, and how she found this new location, which is again conveniently right across the street from the studio. And at the same time, I wanted to know what were the things that she is most proud of physically in the place so that I can also focus on that and be able to illustrate that. So actually, my second tip is communication. You really need to talk to the client. Or I would like to call this talk to the hand. Talk to the hands that built the space. This can either be your client directly, depending on who your actual client is. Your client might be the owner, your client might be the designer, the contractor, or someone involved in the process. Talk to them because number one, you need to know why they need photos. And at the same time, you need to know what they want to see in the photos. And this will ultimately guide your entire process of planning and shooting because this will help you determine all the angles that you will need to do. This will help you determine the details that you need to photograph. And basically, it's also going to allow you to identify the potential challenges because I'm pretty sure that if you talk properly with your client or with the creator of the space, they will be able to identify some things that you will need to watch out for, or at the very least, tell you some things about operations that they might be able to share. So talk to the hands that made the space because it will be very important in helping you plan and helping you determine everything. Now, when it comes to the actual shoot, I would always say, and this is also applicable to when you're planning, because again, you will have a lot of details to work with, hopefully. And it's not always that your client will pay you to shoot everything because sometimes they only really need a set number of photos. So my rule of thumb is to always think of a twin layout for every angle or for every room that you are shooting. Twin layout meaning wide and tight. Or more importantly, one shot that is typically wide or sufficiently wide enough to just show the space in its entirety or at least maximally, and another shot that would be tight or relatively tight to be able to emphasize some of the details. And hopefully your client was already able to identify which details they want you to emphasize, meaning which details you're going to shoot with a tight composition. Of course, this twin layout principle or whatever will not be to limit you to just shooting two shots or two compositions or two layouts in one space. But this means that you can always shoot at least two layouts without fail. Now, if there are more details to work with, then obviously you can do more. And if you find yourself in a position wherein you're only required to shoot a certain number of layouts, I would say just, if you've already seen it and it wouldn't be extra effort to recompose and take another shot and basically take extra photos, then I would always, always, always make sure to have some extras in the bank just in case that the client requests for it. Now, to help you plan out your layouts, this fourth tip should be something you should always keep in mind. And it is actually also a twin kind of thing. Always remember to shoot for the content and the context. What I mean is, of course, when you're shooting a space, you kind of have that notion that you're photographing a product, especially if what you're photographing is a commercial space, either to be sold or to be rented out. And that's totally fine because, again, you would want to be able to show the intricate design that whoever designed it or whoever crafted the space put together. And that's for sure what they want to see in the photographs. That will be the content side of it. Now, what do I mean when I say that you should always also be shooting context? It would also be good to see the space that you're shooting as an environment because I think 99% of the time when we're shooting spaces, it is automatically meant to be used by people. It is automatically meant to be filled. And basically, what will fill that will, of course, be people. So, photograph it as well as an environment. Your goal as a creative, your goal as a photographer is basically to do visual storytelling by simply showing the viewer how they could picture themselves using the place. Because ultimately, again, if this is a space that's to be sold or leased or whatever, then the viewer will have to see themselves using the space. So aside from showing it as a nice product with a nice aesthetic, you want to be able to give it some context. And that means you will need to photograph people inside that space so that number one, they have a point for scale, they have a way to actually see how big this space is, and at the same time, they can see how the space is meant to be used. And that will ultimately tell them the story behind the space and tell them or give them a glimpse of how they can utilize the space for themselves. Now, this last tip should be able to help you in that tricky situations wherein you will have to deal with unpredictable lighting. And simply put, prioritize natural light. What I mean is if there is actually available natural light coming in through windows or doors or whatever in the space, then that also might mean that you need to prioritize shooting this space in daylight. And of course, this will be during whatever time it will be beneficial depending on where the light is coming from and where the angles are actually facing. And if that's the case, which is I think most of the time applicable, then you're only gonna have to deal with artificial light if number one, you need supplemental lighting just to fill in some spots that aren't properly balanced. Or number two, if there are available artificial light that you will need to manage, manipulate, or balance out. So the point here is that deal with what you can control first. Of course, by that I mean you can't control the available natural light, but you can of course anticipate it. And so what you can do is properly time your shoot. Then when you're actually doing the shoot and it is beneficial to you, then all you will need is to add supplemental lighting if necessary or manipulate the artificial light if you can. And if not, then you will have to do other things such as maybe bracket your exposures, do HDR or whatever else. I think this is actually one of the ways wherein me being a landscape photographer helps me in photographing interiors because I always consider where the sun will be and how the light will be behaving inside the space. So since I always have that in mind, I'm able to plan out and anticipate when and where the light will be, and at the same time, I will be able to kind of at least plan out how I will manage that light. I always like being able to show directional light, and this is commonly light coming from windows or doors, and just show how that natural light comes into a space because I think that it also gives you more depth in your composition and gives you a better or just a more palpable mood whenever you're photographing spaces. So I would always say that you should always be mindful and you should always prioritize making the most of the available natural light. And there we go. There are, of course, so many more things to talk about when it comes to photographing interiors. And of course, down the line, I will do more content about this. And if you particularly like these videos about photographing interiors or architectural photography, then do let me know in the comment section. At the same time, if you have some tips to share yourself, then of course, you're free to leave them down below. And if you have any questions, same thing applies. Again, of course, my name is Nicco Valenzuela. I'm a landscape and architectural photographer from the Philippines. And if you're new to the channel, this content has a lot of stuff about landscape photography, architectural photography, motivation, and way too much gear. So if you're into that, then click that subscribe button and hit that notification bell. In any case, thanks for watching.